SCP-4938 Object Class Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. Foundation assets embedded within the U.S. legal system will continue to support Project Fool's Gold, defaming Kirk Hallowell for insider trading and embezzlement. All Hallowell Mining Corporation assets have been acquired by the Foundation and will continue legitimate operations. A 12-kilometer quarantine zone has been established around the town of Feldspar. Bi-weekly deliveries of food and consumer goods will be provided to the population, as dictated by the current project director. Standard cover NATRAD is in effect. Personnel are required to wear full radiation suits when entering SCP-4938. Description: SCP-4938 is the town of Feldspar located in Kosser Valley, Colorado. While officially designated a gold rush ghost town, Feldspar has been the source of some $97 million of commercial gold since 1948. SCP-4938-1 is an anomalous form of radiation that affects a 10-kilometer area including the town of Feldspar. Individuals exposed to this radiation for more than 20 hours may develop tumor-like growths throughout the body. As these growths metastasize, heavy metals will spontaneously and proportionally generate within. While gold is prevalent through 76% of all cases, platinum, gallium, bismuth, and even uranium have also been detected. As a result, prolonged exposure to SCP-4938-1 has an extremely high fatality rate. The native residents of Feldspar exhibit a unique response to SCP-4938-1. Tumors are formed more rapidly in greater size. This will most often cause an extreme loss of mobility, along with persistent pain and discomfort. Despite this fact, nearly a third of these 634 residents are over 100 years old and in stable health. Once no longer exposed to SCP-4938-1, these individuals experience a rapid decline in physical health. No known method exists to relocate the population without extreme loss of life. For nearly 80 years, the Hallowell Mining Corporation had been utilizing the Feldspar populace for profit. In exchange for basic supplies and sundries, individuals would submit to the surgical removal of the metallic growths. This continued into 2004 when Mrs. Dana Walsh, a Feldspar resident, placed a call with the U.S. National Guard. All information she provided was intercepted by embedded Foundation agents. Project Fool's Gold was launched soon after. Feldspar residents have thus far proven non-hostile but highly uncooperative. Interview log POI-4938-178 3/8/2004. The following interview was conducted by researcher Lawrence Horowitz. The interviewee was Miss Dana Walsh, 102-year-old lifetime resident of Feldspar.
We'd like to thank you for reaching out to us, Mrs. Walsh. I can assure you your safety will be... Oh, save it. You can't help me. My organization has considerable... You look at me, boy. You see how old I am. You see what this town has done to me. There ain't nothing my neighbors can do to hurt me. And nothing you can do that will help me. So save it. You just keep your end of the bargain. Yes, ma'am. Your great-great-granddaughter has already been evacuated. Good. Now, as for our side of the bargain... She's got my husband's eyes, you know. Bright and green. She's only 5 years old. I still remember things from that age. My mother's face playing in the yard. I hope she doesn't remember a single thing about this awful place. I don't believe she will. Now, about... I heard you. Just tell me what you want to know. Everything. How did this all begin? What's causing it? When did your arrangement with HMC start? Why won't anyone talk to us?
Mrs. Walsh does not respond immediately. With some difficulty, she points at the nearby television set. Faintly, the sounds of grating and metallic crackling are heard. Her elbow rests on a growth beneath the ribcage, roughly the size of a volleyball.
The new Halliwell boy, Cliff. Kirk. Ugly name. I saw him on the TV after the sentencing. He's a greedy little son of a gun. Him and his father both. You know, neither of them have ever been to Feldspar. Not once. They just took what they wanted and left us with barely enough to survive. It wasn't always like that. Hawthorne Halliwell, the great-grandpappy himself, was at Cripple Creek, Klondike, and Mount Baker. First, he was a panner, then a store owner, and then he was running his own dang company. A great man, but he was a ruthless businessman, sure. But he also had that rare kind of stupid risk-taking that all the great old American entrepreneurs had. When he passed on, his sons Douglas and Edwin each got a half of everything. I just don't mean the company. Douglas got all the ruthless, building copper mines in Arizona while forcing folks off their land. Edwin, you might have guessed, was the stupid risk-taker. Edwin staked his whole fortune on this little town, all because of a few panfuls. Those prospectors just got lucky though. There's barely enough gold in these hills to feed the town. Edwin bled the company near to death, keeping Feldspar alive. Heck, he went down into the mines himself most weeks, like he couldn't believe we weren't sitting on the next Sierra Nevada. I think he just felt guilty. Guilty? What do you mean?
Well, old Edwin had a daughter, Julia, and he had promised her the world. He thought he'd be building her a golden palace out here, but instead, she wound up like one of those storybook girls, locked up in the Halliwell estate all day. At night, though, all us girls would sneak out. My mother owned the inn, so I would swipe food from the kitchens. Maddie had her uncle's old radio. Raquel would always snatch something from her daddy's liquor cabinet. Ruby and Kay, well, they just kinda showed up. And we would all meet up and head down to the river. Julia, too, of course. A sweet girl. Rich as she was, she never looked down on us. We were all just a bunch of miners' daughters, drinking and smoking and wishing the night away like we'd never grow old. God, those were good times. Those nights we'd talk about every little thing. Our dreams of heading out east, bits of news that we'd get from the papers, and boys. Oh Lord, how we collect on about boys. And good golly, Miss Ruby thought snooping in on her older sisters and made her queen know-it-all of sex. Mrs. Walsh begins to laugh and then cough. Researcher Horowitz carefully hands her a nearby handkerchief and a glass of water. Mrs. Walsh waves away the water but uses the cloth to wipe around her chin and the ring of grows beneath her neck. She moves carefully, avoiding a series of small, multi-hued bismuth crystals that had pierced the flesh and become half covered in scar tissue. I'm fine, don't get up. Now Julia and Raquel, they never seemed to join in on that kind of talk. Julia didn't surprise me, she was always shy. But Raquel, that girl spoke her mind like it was the holy word. I couldn't figure it out, of course. Even if I had. Back in those days, we didn't talk about that kind of thing.
What kind of?
They were in love, Sonny. It was plain as the nose on my face, but back then, I never realized why they kept sneaking off together. It's sad to say those days didn't last. We were all coming up on marrying age, and in a small town like this, there are certain expectations. Raquel, well, her daddy had drunk himself to death after a couple months, and her auntie had paired her up with the butcher's son for a discount on back bacon. Mr. Halliwell brought in some city boy tycoon son for Julia, a real pompous guy who didn't see the difference between this town and the dirt that it's built on.
Well, the girls started to drift apart after that. Last time I saw Julia was just before the wedding, and she looked a frightful mess. Her husband-to-be had promised to bring in machines from the city, automation and deep drills. I didn't understand most of it, but I sure understood what she told me last. It's to keep the town alive, she said. We need gold to keep this town alive. And Julia and Raquel both got pregnant around the same time. That wasn't so odd, a small town like this. I had my first just a month before. Things really got strange when they gave birth on the same day, though. The same hour, too. It could have been down to the second, but no one at Raquel's home owned a watch. Both those babies had pale skin, dark eyes, and perfect yellow tufts of hair. Now this caused a bit of a ruckus, given both girls and their husbands had black hair. Suddenly every blonde fella in town was suddenly getting a sideways eye. The next day, folks started getting real sick. Fevers, pains, and the gross, of course. Nobody knew what it was, but it spread quickly. We're not a big town, but it was the first time that I'd ever seen the inn empty at noontime. For days and days, the streets were deserted, except for the stay fella stumbling around like a drunkard, coughing and tossing up their lunch. 10 died in the first week. We burned them a half-mile out of town. Raquel, Julia, and their families were the only ones not getting sick. You add that to the odd babies and no one getting paid since no one could work the mines. Everybody started getting a bit crazy, especially Mr. Peterson. After his wife had passed on, he'd just spend all day wandering about quoting Bible verses, saying signs of the devil come in twos. And twins born of different mothers, he'd shout. A biblical plague born of greed. The worse things got, the more people listened. At least Julia was safe in that big old house. Miss Raquel, well, with the baby looking as it did. I'm not sure if her husband threw her out or if she just left. I do know that she was staying with her auntie. They didn't have much. I remember she came in asking for food once. My mother wouldn't even give her milk for the baby. I had to sneak it to her out the back door. I'm glad I did, I am, but I wish that wasn't my last memory of her. I want to remember Raquel as she was, back when we'd meet by the river. I want to close my eyes and see her all young and proud. Not God, she looked so small that day. She looked so scared. That was the first and only time I'd ever actually seen one of the twins. Raquel had had it all bundled up in her arms. She looked like any other babe, no different from my own until I saw its eyes. I don't know if I can describe them. They weren't fully wrong, really, they just didn't catch the light right. No shine. It was almost like looking at a paper drawing. Just 2 little white circles with a single black dot. And they were so dark, like a mine shaft stretching on down forever. Mrs. Walsh. Mrs. Walsh, are you alright? After a few months went by.
Mrs. Walsh falls into another coughing fit. When she doubles over and researcher Horowitz helps steady her with incredible difficulty. At the time of this interview, Mrs. Walsh weighed 340 pounds, 1/3 biomass and 2/3 heavy metals.
Mrs. Walsh, I think it'd be best if you return to bed. We can continue this at a later date. No, someone needs to hear this, dang it. The town kept getting worse, and then one night I heard people shouting outside my window. Someone screamed. My mama came in, told me to stay in bed, and locked my door with a latch. A big iron latch. I didn't see what happened, I just got told. I wasn't there. A few houses got lit on fire. Some people were killed. Mr. Hallowell died in town square. They had beat him to death. Julia, Raquel, their husbands, their mothers, even some of their friends. People say that it was an accident. Just some drunk, scared people who got too caught up in things. Nobody even talked about it the next day. Acted like it never happened. That's it? There's no investigation afterwards?
Well, it was a different time, son. The law didn't stretch out this far. Someone did notice, though. Douglas Hallowell. He showed up a month later looking for his family, and we told him that the sickness had got him. And it was the worst lie that we ever told. He brought in doctors. He wanted to know what had killed his brother, but instead, he found what was growing inside of us. So, that's 3 of your questions answered. The last one should need asking by now. Your organization is just telling us the same stuff we heard from Douglas Hallowell. We're here to help. The tumors need to be removed. It's not about the gold. Yeah, BS. It's all BS. You're just another bunch of...
What about the babies?
What?
You told me what happened to Edwin and Julia Raquel, but you never mentioned the twins. What happened to them? Mrs. Walsh, do you need...
We buried them. They took them into the mountain, into one of the old dry mine shafts, and they buried them.
I see. So, you believe?
Ain't nothing to do with belief, boy. I know it. We're cursed. Towns like these aren't meant to keep on living. We're supposed to come and go with the gold. For what we did, by God, I think we're going to live forever.
Thank you for your time, Mrs. Walsh. I think we should stop there.
Addendum. Mrs. Walsh was discovered dead in her home the next day. A previously undocumented tumor was found pressing on her medulla. This growth contained 0.05 grams of 24-karat gold. Addendum 4938-A. An exploration was launched into the mining network surrounding Feldspar, utilizing specifically designed Geiger counters. 2 unique geological formations were discovered. SCP-4938-2 and SCP-4938-3 are a set of 18-meter ore clusters composed of an unknown platinum composite. These clusters have a density of 23.587, outclassing osmium as the densest terrestrial metal. Despite their identical chemical composition, each cluster emits a different form of radiation. D-Class personnel exposed to samples of -2 and -3 separately show no adverse effects. Simultaneous exposures required to form SCP-4938-1 tumorous growths. Conceivably, both clusters could be mined out and separated to a neutralizing distance. The O5 Council and Ethics Committee have ruled against this action, as to maintain the health and safety of the Feldspar residents. Medical staff will continue removing tumors as they present. Precious metals collected will be put to use in foundation equipment and funding efforts. The Department of Finance has been tasked with regulating the export of gold and to prevent global inflation. Notice to all staff currently assigned to SCP-4938. Your concerns, both outspoken and privately discussed, have not gone unheard. We are not exploiting the people of Feldspar. We are not harvesting them, as HMC once did. What we are doing is providing necessary medical aid to a community stricken with a unique illness. Discarding the precious metals recovered during this process would simply be wasteful. Most importantly, cursed gold does not exist. We have found absolutely no evidence to corroborate the testimony of Mrs. Dana Walsh. Edwin Hallowell died in a mining accident in 1921. Julia Hallowell died of tuberculosis later that year. She had no child. SCP-4938 is an anomalous form of geological radiation, and nothing more. We consider this discussion closed. O5-4